In the fall, after graduating from college, I traveled to Europe for a few weeks of exploring. My dear friend Erev, who many of you know as our community's music director extraordinaire, was spending some extended time over there, and I was going to visit him and have my first and only, so far, Europe experience. As it happened, the beginning of my trip coincided with the High Holy Days. At the time, I was not particularly observant. I wasn't a consistent shul goer, but I had never missed being in synagogue over the High Holy Days. As I hung out in rural Tuscany, I remember feeling an acute sense of panic about finding a shul to attend for the holidays. And more importantly, I felt desperate to be among other Jews. Our travels took us from place to place, and we found ourselves davening in small and large synagogues in both Italy and France. I spoke neither Italian nor French. Some of the melodies the community sung were familiar to me, and some were not. Aside from the security guards, always positioned outside, who I had to convince through speaking Hebrew that we were Jewish and safe and should be allowed inside, the native Italians and French seemed to barely notice we were there at all. And none of this mattered. It was the holidays, and I was with my people. At one level, it doesn't really make obvious sense why Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are consistently the most well-attended services of the Jewish calendar, and by far. After all, the spiritual themes of the High Holy Days are much more oriented to each of us as individuals than any of our other festivals, which tend to focus on our historic communal experience. One might think it much more reasonable that we would gather in our largest numbers on Shavuot, when we celebrate the collective revelation on Sinai, or on Passover, when we celebrate having been freed collectively from slavery. But instead, our biggest gatherings each year on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when our primary religious instructions are to engage each of us in our own hearts and minds. In Cheshbon HaNefesh, the practice of turning inward, an accounting of our souls, followed by Teshuvah, the practice of intentionally and proactively working to repair and strengthen relationships that require tending, and making an effort to change unskillful behaviors that are causing harm to ourselves and others. Both of these practices are ultimately deeply personal work. To take the invitation of this season seriously means that the bulk of the spiritual work of the High Holy Days takes place outside of the synagogue, in the intimacy of our homes, with our closest circle of family and friends, and alone, in quiet spaces where our minds can settle sufficiently that we can notice and hear the messages and yearnings that we have previously missed, ignored, and avoided. And yet, here we are, finding ways to be together as a community, both in person and virtually, here in Northampton, and literally around the world. A large number of us are packed tightly together in this room, the greatest number of people that we've had in this room since this time last year. Likely for many of us here in person, we're sharing space with some people we know quite well and with whom we have deep, long-standing ties, along with some people we recognize, perhaps know by name, but not particularly well, in addition to many people we don't know at all. All around the world, Jews of all stripes are having this experience, observant and secular alike, feel moved to usher in Rosh Hashanah in community. Why then do we feel such a deep calling to observe the High Holy Days, and why do we feel such a strong impulse to come together at this particular moment in time? Of course, there's not a specific, necessarily singular, simple answer to these questions. While our showing up over the High Holy Days is likely driven by some combination of forces that might very well include nostalgia, or some guilt-tinged sense of obligation, or just some strong but not fully explicable feeling of, well, this is just what Jews do, my sense is that we're also here in large part because the central themes of the holidays authentically speak to us. Regardless of how familiar or unfamiliar we are with the words of the Machzor, whether or not we read or understand Hebrew, the nature of our personal theology, the state of our relationship with God and Judaism, or how much we loved or hated Hebrew school. The central spiritual themes of this season, namely our confrontation with mortality, the call to deep introspection, forgiveness and renewal, and the notion that with some intention and dedication, we might yet be able to experience more fully the person we have a sense that we have the capacity to be. These themes strike a deep chord within our hearts and minds. Even as part of us may want to run as far and as fast in the other direction as possible from facing these subjects and this work, a deeper part of us won't allow us to run and hide. We're beckoned to confront our lives with all the messiness, with all the disappointments, and with all the unfinished business. One of the powerful images of the High Holy Days is that the entire community of Israel stands before the Holy One, be'agudat achad, as a single spiritual unit. Indeed, we join together this evening as an agudat achad. Some inside this room, some outside the walls, some at home, one community comprised of many individuals, one organism with many limbs. And each of us has experienced so much this past year, countless moments of pain and suffering, and countless moments of joy and freedom. Between us, we celebrated the birth of children and grandchildren. We've lost loved ones. Some of our dear ones have passed in the maturity of their days and with fair warning, and others have passed unexpectedly and far too soon. We've been diagnosed with cancer. We've battled illness and are in remission. We've struggled with mental health. We found the courage to open up about our pain and sought help. We've fallen in love. Meaningful relationships have ended. We've struggled with drugs and alcohol. We celebrated minor and major personal triumphs, learned to walk, learned to read, graduated school, started new jobs, changed careers, recovered from illness and injury. Collectively, we've experienced every emotion human beings are wired to emote. During the pandemic, I started back up a consistent meditation practice. For well over a year, I sat almost every day at home in my room by myself. Since the pandemic has eased up, I've had the opportunity to participate in a few in-person retreats with 100 or so other retreatants. One thing about these retreats is that they are completely silent. Teachers talk when they offer teachings and instructions, but the retreatants don't talk. In fact, you're instructed to avoid making eye contact with one another. Given that you don't really communicate with other people for the entire period of the retreat, and each individual person is busy attending to their own minds and hearts, it's reasonable to wonder why bother coming together at all. Why not just sit at home and listen to a great meditation podcast from your favorite teacher? Without fail, by the end of each retreat, I'm struck by how deeply connected, how close I feel towards my fellow retreatants with whom I've spent long days sitting, walking, and eating in silence. It is in fact nothing like being at home sitting by myself. Without exchanging a word or even a glance, I feel profoundly supported and buoyed by the people around me. I draw energy from them when I'm tired. I draw inspiration from them when I'm bored. I draw courage from them when I want to give up. It's remarkable how much intimacy can develop between individuals who share this precious time together with shared intention and purpose. All the more so us. In a community where many of us have strong ties to at least one other person, if not 100 other people. In a community where most of us are not anonymous, we have ripe conditions to offer support and inspiration and encouragement to one another as we each attend to our own hearts and minds. And the support we offer need not require words spoken between us or necessarily even glances. We don't even need to know one another's names. We don't even need to be in the same physical spaces. Simply through our very presence, our intention, our good intentions, our kindness towards one another, and our open hearts, we have the opportunity to create a bond of spiritual friendship that will create an atmosphere we will all sense and that will carry us over the next 10 days. This leads me to a brief note about decorum. In 1958, when I was just kidding. In 1958, 65 years ago, as part of a scathing critique of synagogue life, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote the following words that I'm afraid are sadly still pertinent. I hear them tonight as a warning and also as a challenge. He wrote, "Our services are conducted with pomp and precision. The rendition of the liturgy is smooth. Everything is present, decorum, voice, ceremony, but one thing is missing, life. One knows in advance what will ensue. There will be no surprise, no adventure of the soul. There will be no sudden burst of devotion. Nothing is going to happen to the soul. Nothing unpredictable must happen to the person who prays. They will attain no insight into the words they read. They will attain no new perspective for the life they live." He continues, "An air of tranquility, complacency prevails in our synagogues. What can come out of such an atmosphere? The services are prim, the voice is dry. The synagogue is clean and tidy, and the soul of prayer lies in agony. You know no one will scream, except the little kids. No one will cry, except the little kids. The words will be stillborn." End of quote. The atmosphere in this room, under the tent, and from wherever we're live streaming, whether it feels alive or dead, truly depends on each of us. If we can allow ourselves to get out of our own way enough so that we can be present to the unfolding here and now, if we can welcome and be curious about, rather than push away, whatever arises in our hearts and minds, if we can catch ourselves when we're judging others around us, or when we are concerned about being judged ourselves, and this will not only allow for the possibility of our having a truly meaningful experience ourselves, but it will also help everyone else give themselves permission to do so, to be surprised, to be moved, to cry or laugh, to open our hearts a bit more. Over the first few days of a silent meditation retreat, the meditation hall is actually remarkably loud. Loud not only because you hear the rustling of clothes and the repositioning of cushions and creaking of chairs as people struggle to sit still, but because you can actually feel the cumulative chaotic mental activity of 100 people as they slowly transition from all the intensity of their everyday lives. And by the end of the week or 10 days or whatever it is, after people's minds have begun to settle, the quality of silence in the hall is palpably different. If we engage each of us wholeheartedly over the next 10 days in the work of Cheshbon HaNefesh, in the work of Teshuvah, in the work of opening up our hearts, not only when we come together for services, but even more so during the times when we go our separate ways, then when we gather together for the final service of Ne'ilah, when the gates are closing on Yom Kippur, it will most certainly feel different in this room, in our homes, and in our hearts. Shana Tova.